Movement is life. In biology, the ability to keep moving is paid for continually using chemical energy from food. And because that energy body is precious, nature usually makes endless motion either extremely discreet or simply impossible. Now, meet Spoink, a species of psychic-type Pokémon that produces locomotion continuously, bouncing on a spring-like tail until it dies, according to the Pokédex. Except, Spoink doesn't seem to ever run out of energy. You might be tempted to say, neither does our heart, but our hearts aren't pumping around the weight of an entire body in blood. And it isn't like it's as huge as an elephant that has up to half a ton of blood in its body. So, the contradiction becomes measurable. How powerful does Spoink need to be to maintain continuous vertical bouncing? Locomotion is ultimately constrained by the body's ability to recruit muscle, which consumes ATP, the unit of energy for life processes to happen. ATP supply is maintained by metabolism. The metabolism of an organism refers to all the chemical reactions taking place in the body. ATP demand rises whenever the body needs to undergo a metabolic process, such as engaging in cellular growth and repair, muscle contraction, signal transportation, etc. A natural non-negotiable is efficiency. Muscle converts metabolic energy into mechanical energy with a peak efficiency around 25% in humans, meaning around 75% of expended energy is lost as heat rather than used for work. Elastic tissues, mainly tendons, can store and return some strain energy, reducing the need for active muscle work, but this is rather low. Still, it makes force production a more efficient process. Also, there are different kinds of muscle fibers: slow twitch and fast twitch. Slow twitch are more efficient. However, sustained high power outputs are limited over long durations by oxygen intake and physiological ceilings. Fatigue is associated with depletion of energy stores, and mechanical systems face overuse injury risk when repeatedly operated at high load and strain. Before we start throwing equations at bouncing pig-like creatures, we need to establish our assumptions. So physics will apply as it does in our reality. Where on Earth, gravity is constant. If Spoink rises up and down, we calculate the energy change in a gravitational potential using the change in potential energy is equal to m times g times h. Spoink is also a warm-blooded animal, so we can define its resting energy to scale roughly with mass to the power of 3/4. This is a famous empirical relationship in physiology known as Kleiber's law. We'll use this information to calculate a sensible ballpark resting power for a 30-kilogram creature. The Pokédex may state that the pearl magnifies its psychic power, but we will not allow Spoink to violate the law of conservation of energy. Now, if Spoink are keeping their hearts beating by bouncing, it suggests their bounces should be as frequent as the heartbeat of a 30-kilogram animal. This would mean its bounces should be about 100 beats per minute, which equates to between 1 and 2 bounces per second. However, this assumes Spoink is at rest, sleeping. If it is expected to do vigorous exercise, this could increase to 2 to 4 bounces per second. Biological springs, such as tendons, are extremely efficient, losing potentially only a small percentage of their energy with every bounce. For example, wallabies, which are effectively miniature kangaroos, can increase their speed while hopping with little or no increase in energy expenditure. According to the same research, the higher the intensity of hopping or bouncing, the more energy is recovered in the tendons. As a result of this, the energy required to sustain Spoink's resting heart rate would be roughly the same as if it were going twice as fast, given that it presumably would have evolved to use energy conservatively. Even still, the energy would have to be minimal for Spoink to be able to not get exhausted just by keeping its heart beating. As a rough approximation, given its mass of 30.6 kilograms, the gravitational field strength of approximately 10 newtons per kilogram, and a change in vertical height per bounce of about 0.4 meters, the metabolic cost of bouncing would be about 1000 watts if we assume a typical day of activity and an efficiency of 25%. Using Kleiber's law, we can estimate that Spoink would need about 600 kilocalories per day, or 30 joules per second. This means that the power of keeping its heart functioning is over 30 times greater than the cost of all other metabolic processes combined at rest. Now this is where the pearl comes in, because it prevents Spoink from growing tired due to its constant bouncing. Yes, theoretically, the metabolic cost of bouncing could be 1000 watts, but that is assuming each bounce is an isolated movement performed individually. The body is extremely effective at continuing an activity. For a Spoink, the pearl allows it to waste less energy in contracting its muscles and optimizes the timing of bounces to match the resonant frequency of Spoink's tendons. In short, the pearl does not increase Spoink's energy, it just allows Spoink to use the energy it has more efficiently. Assuming Spoink are built like wallabies, this suggests that the pearl can reduce the metabolic cost of bouncing by 90%. Altogether then, this means that Spoink requires 600 kilocalories per day from all their other metabolic functions, plus an additional 2,400 kilocalories per day from bouncing, for a total of 3,000 kilocalories per day, which is the daily requirement of an endurance athlete. 3,000 kilocalories per day is around 150 watts. The peak mechanical power from human muscles upon jumping vertically can be in excess of 5,000 watts. But this is certainly not sustainable for much more than a fraction of a second. Plyometrics can improve someone's explosive power, but Spoink doesn't need to increase their bouncing height. 3,000 kilocalories is approximately 12.5 million joules, so it is very possible for Spoink to unleash massive bursts of power for a limited time. Over long durations, humans cannot sustain an energy output greater than about 2.5 times their resting metabolic rate. For instance, a Tour de France cyclist might burn 5,000 kilocalories per day for several weeks. Meanwhile, their resting metabolic rate might just be about 2,000 kilocalories per day. 2.5 times 2000 approaches 5,000 kilocalories per day, so if the athlete tried burning more calories, they could lose mass in critical places. For Spoink, its bouncing power is about 4 times its resting metabolic rate, which means even with the help of its pearl, it might not be able to sustain itself without losing critical mass. This may explain why it's always in search for larger pearls, as a larger pearl may increase the efficiency of Spoink's movements and reduce the power needed for it to bounce. To make Spoink compatible with real energetics, its bouncing cannot be interpreted as continual high amplitude jumping. Instead, it must be interpreted as a tuned mass spring oscillation, essentially simple harmonic motion, in which, number one, elastic structures return the bulk of mechanical energy each cycle. And number 2, Spoink operates near a preferred resonant frequency that minimizes energetic cost while maintaining spring-like mechanics. Under that interpretation, Spoink benefits from the requirement for an energy-storing spring that combines low energy loss, high fatigue resistance, and safe operating stresses, something which in real mammals tends to come with injury vulnerability when heavily loaded or repeatedly cycled. Spoink's necessity to bounce until it dies is energetically viable only if its bouncing is predominantly resonant and elastic, in which case the continuous power burden can just be a few times greater than its resting metabolic rate, sans the bouncing. Assuming that its pearl can effectively make Spoink waste less energy with each bounce, the larger the pearl, the more energy Spoink can reserve for other activities such as foraging for food. It is curious that Spoink need to continuously shock their hearts into beating. It implies that their hearts do not contain a natural pacemaker. Come to think of it, perhaps they aren't the only Pokemon with a lack of a natural rhythm generator.